Picture it. A lone jukebox flickering in the corner of a smoky diner, somewhere deep in Texas, playing a melody too raw to ignore. It's the early 1950s, and in a land of honky-tonk bars, two-lane highways, and broken hearts, a young man leans against a beat-up Ford with a cigarette hanging loose from his lip. His voice, when it finally breaks the silence, carries the weight of every wrong turn, every lonely mile. That man is not yet a legend. He's still just a drifter with a guitar, a prison record, and something to prove. This isn't just another country singer's tale. In the late summer days of 1927, in Bristol, a city still humming from Jimmie Rodgers's groundbreaking first chords, another boy was quietly growing up, absorbing gospel hymns and heartfelt Appalachian ballads, unaware that he too would soon leave an indelible mark on American music. Born on February 13th, 1919, Ernest Jennings Ford, who would become beloved as Tennessee Ernie Ford, arrived into a world where melodies flowed naturally, as if carried on the mountain breeze. Like Rodgers before him, Ford's voice would resonate deeply with the struggles, faith, and humble dreams of everyday people. Yet, his journey began simply, in wooden church pews and small-town gatherings, learning to sing from a mother whose melodies brightened even their modest home. The railroad tracks that symbolized Rodgers's restless journey also defined Ford's path, one of steady progress, unwavering faith, and a voice that spoke sincerely to millions. Bristol, straddling the Tennessee-Virginia border, was already famous as one of the birthplaces of country music, an irony not lost on the bright, earnest child who'd later become Tennessee Ernie Ford. By the 1930s, he'd learned not just to sing but to breathe life into every note, picking up vocal tips from his mother, a part-time piano teacher in the community, and then refining them in the local church choir. He also caught the attention of local music enthusiasts who recognized that behind his unwavering eye contact and comforting grin lay a distinctly warm baritone. At King College in Virginia, he studied vocal performance for a spell, though finances and the Great Depression meant formal schooling came and went in fits and starts. No matter. His real education was unfolding in the dusty pews and backwoods barns of southwestern Virginia and eastern Tennessee. By 1937, at 18, Ernie found an unexpected path that let him channel both his comedic wit and his honeyed voice, radio announcing. He landed a gig at WAPI in his hometown of Bristol, cutting his teeth on everything from local news to spin-around country records. He discovered that a microphone loved him, that warm baritone that had once mesmerized churchgoers now floated effortlessly across the airwaves. Listeners wrote letters praising his down-home charm and kindly humor. From there, he moved to WROL in Knoxville, Tennessee, further refining what would become his signature style, folksy but never coarse, comedic but always respectful, a perfect blend of small-town sincerity and showbiz sparkle. No one knew it yet, but Tennessee Ernie Ford was taking shape. World events intervened. As the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the rumblings of global conflict shook the country. Ernie met a young woman named Betty Jean Heminger at the Victorville Air Force Base in California in 1941. Fate had led him out west seeking broadcast gigs and the promise of stable employment in uncertain times. Betty was bright, spirited, and seemed to understand Ernie's gentleness instantly. They married on September 18, 1942, just months before he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. She was 21, he was 23, and both braced for a world rapidly spinning toward war. The Army Air Corps shaped Ernie in unexpected ways. Trained as a B-24 bombardier instructor, he rose to the rank of lieutenant, Stationed at various points around the U.S., he combined discipline with a certain flair for rallying morale among the men. At base gatherings, he'd slip into comedic routines or lead the troops in a cappella renditions of beloved church hymns or toe-tapping country tunes. The commanding officers noted how Ford's presence could cut through tension, how even the most anxious pilot would smile when the big-voiced Tennessean started telling a homespun joke or humming a melodic snippet. By the time Ernie was discharged in 1945, the war was ending, and he carried with him the sense that life was fleeting and precious, something he'd hold on to for the rest of his days. He returned to civilian life that year with renewed purpose. As soon as he was out of uniform, Ernie set his sights on a place that had been calling him ever since his first radio shift, California. Specifically, he landed at KXLA in Pasadena, a station near the vibrant West Coast country scene. The post-war era saw a surge of Western swing and honky-tonk clubs in Southern California, as families from Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas migrated west in search of jobs. They brought their fiddles, guitars, and southwestern draws with them. Ernie, with his East Tennessee accent and comedic flair, fit in seamlessly. He'd spend afternoons spinning records, then evenings schmoozing with local country musicians. Slowly, that comedic persona gained polish, and so did his singing. By 1949, Capitol Records took notice, handing him a contract that many aspiring performers would have done anything to get. Mule Train, a song popularized by several artists, became Ernie's stepping stone to national recognition when his 1949 version soared to #1 on the country charts and even reached #9 in pop. Its million-plus sales told the world that his brand of Western-inflected bass vocals was more than a regional novelty. Between the comedic monologues he peppered into radio appearances and the big-lunged belt he unleashed on stage, Ernie was forging a style that wasn't strictly honky-tonk, nor purely pop. It was something else altogether. Audiences responded, especially those who wanted a dash of humor mixed with robust musicality. By 1954, Ernie was dabbling in the new frontier of television. Lucille Ball, whose I Love Lucy show dominated ratings, invited him to appear in a cameo role. At the time, TV was a fairly exclusive realm, and Lucy's endorsement was gold. Audiences who'd heard him on the radio or read about him in country music columns finally got to see that beaming face, that boyish grin, and hear that rumbling voice in their living rooms. The cameo was a hit, showcasing Ernie's comedic instincts in tandem with Lucy's comedic genius. This national exposure set the stage for his next big move. In 1955 came the song that would define his entire career, 16 Tons. An older tune by Merle Travis, who wrote it about the back-breaking labor in Kentucky coal mines. The song was powerful, moody, and haunting. Travis's version had resonated in country circles, but it was Ernie's deeper-than-deep bass reading that turned 16 Tons into a phenomenon. He snapped his fingers in a stark, mesmerizing beat, letting the darkness of the lyrics seep into every bar. I owe my soul to the company store. Listeners, many of whom had endured hard labor in their own lives, felt that line like a gut punch. Meanwhile, a nation fresh off the buoyant optimism of the early 50s took notice of a song that unflinchingly addressed the plight of the working class. 16 Tons soared to #1 on both the pop and country charts, selling over 4 million copies in record time. It was an unstoppable cultural force, referenced in newspaper columns, parodied on variety shows, and whistled by factory workers at shift's end. Ernie quickly earned the moniker Tennessee Ernie, underscoring his folksy persona, though he sometimes joked that Kentucky Merle deserved half the credit for writing such a gem. That same year, 1955, Ernie started hosting a daily daytime show, the Tennessee Ernie Ford Show, on ABC. Americans were just getting used to the idea that daytime TV could be more than soap operas and game shows. Ernie brought in country acts, comedic sketches, and a down-home charm that made housewives and shift workers alike feel at home. It was modest in budget, but big in spirit, paving the way for his next leap, primetime stardom. From 1956 to 1961, The Ford Show, sponsored by the Ford Motor Company, though no direct relation to Ernie's name, aired on NBC in a plum evening slot. Up to 30 million viewers tuned in every week to watch Ernie do exactly what he'd done on radio. Greet folks with a friendly, bless your pea-pickin' little hearts, crack a few jokes about everyday life, bring on star guests from the country and pop world, then sign off with a sweet hymn or spiritual. The Pea Picker nickname traced back to stories of his youth, and viewers latched onto it as part of his brand. Who else in the blossoming TV era had such a folksy handle? Amid all this fame, Ernie never forgot the gospel roots that nurtured him. In 1956, he recorded an album called Hymns, which unexpectedly became a massive bestseller. Its success led him to record a string of spiritual records that sold in the millions, catapulting him into a separate orbit as a gospel singer. By 1964, he and Betty even snagged a Grammy Award for Best Inspirational Performance with Great Gospel Songs, a heartfelt collaboration that let them share the stage in a new light. Churches across America latched onto Ernie's gospel recordings, finding that his sincere interpretation spoke to the faithful in a way that no polished preacher could. They heard the humility, the gratitude, and the sense that this was a man who truly believed every note he sang. Yet while 16 Tons and his gospel recordings kept him in the national consciousness, by the late 1950s, Ernie's mainstream chart success was slowing. His final top 10 hit on the country charts was Shotgun Boogie in 1950, ironically overshadowed by the juggernaut that came 5 years later. He didn't mind, though. He was busy hosting television specials, dropping in on variety programs, and continuing to cut records that might not top the charts, but still found an appreciative audience. Over the decades, he racked up 17 charting country singles and 8 that went to number 1, not to mention the vast success in pop. The cumulative effect was that by the mid-1970s, the name Tennessee Ernie Ford carried weight in multiple genres: country, pop, gospel, comedic variety, even a dash of Western swing. The 1970s saw him exploring new avenues. He guest hosted or appeared on shows like Hee Haw, bridging the older era of country entertainment with the modern comedic approach. In 1972, he headlined a White Christmas special, complete with a choir and an overt nod to the holiness of the holiday. In 1975, he recorded an album with Glenn Campbell called Ernie Sings and Glenn Picks, further proving he could adapt to fresh contexts. If asked about the secret to his longevity, Ernie might have answered with a grin and a homely metaphor, something along the lines of, "If you keep your heart open to folks and your voice open to the Lord, there ain't no telling how far you'll go." Behind the scenes, his marriage to Betty was a sturdy anchor. They'd married young, weathered war, traveled across the country for broadcasting jobs, and raised 2 sons, Jeffrey Buckner, Buck, born in 1950, and Brian Leonard, born in 1952. Buck eventually veered into screenwriting, while Brian tried his hand at music. Ernie and Betty had to navigate the typical strains of stardom and the persistent demands of show business. Betty was sometimes overshadowed by her husband's towering public persona, but Ernie never missed a chance to credit her. Indeed, when they recorded gospel duets, one could hear a synergy that suggested two hearts beating as one. They were also quite open about their Christian faith, which occasionally drew scorn from more cynical corners of the entertainment world. But Ernie simply shrugged and said he'd rather be disliked for his authenticity than loved for a lie. Time inevitably extracts its toll. By the 1980s, Ernie found himself slowing down. The primetime variety show era had concluded, replaced by cable TV and a more fragmented audience. He still took the occasional stage for a gospel concert or a special tribute show, but had no illusions about recapturing the universal fame of his prime. Age had crept up, bringing with it new challenges. Around this time, Betty's health worsened. She struggled with alcoholism, a reality they'd kept hidden from the public for years. On February 26, 1989, she passed away from liver failure, leaving Ernie bereft. He'd lost his singing partner, his comedic foil, and above all, his best friend of nearly 5 decades. In an interview with the Tennessean, he confided, "I lost my best friend. People talk about marriage as a partnership, but for me it was simpler. We were just side by side all the way." Sorrow does strange things to a person. For Ernie, it carried him through a gauntlet of grief that tested his faith and forced him to confront the hollowness inside. And yet, in the twilight, a chance for love came again. In September of that same year, 1989, he married Beverly Wood, a nurse he'd met in the midst of a rehab setting, where he sought to manage stress and cut back on drinking that had become a coping mechanism after Betty's decline. They settled in Portola Valley, a serene corner of California that let him escape the frantic spotlight. He occasionally performed or made brief appearances on TV tributes, but mostly he was content to live quietly, reading scripture, entertaining visiting friends with stories of his earliest days in radio, and spoiling his grandchildren when they dropped by. On October 17, 1991, though, that steady calm met an abrupt end. Ernie traveled to Reston, Virginia, scheduled to appear at a White House event celebrating American music traditions. Perhaps the itinerary was too tight, or the rigors of flying too taxing. Whatever the case, his body failed him, and he suffered acute liver failure, the final echo of a lifetime of letting the occasional drink become more than occasional. He died at 72, leaving behind a sense of national mourning. Newspapers from the Los Angeles Times to the Washington Post ran front-page obituaries, praising him as the gentle giant of country music whose baritone had once halted the daily bustle of America, even if only for the length of a 3-minute song. He was buried at Alta Mesa Memorial Park in Palo Alto, beside Betty, reuniting them in final rest. The epitaph might have read simply, "Bless your pea-pickin hearts," a phrase so thoroughly his that fans still utter it with a fond smile. Jeffrey and Brian, his 2 sons, mourned not just the father who told corny jokes and softly scolded them to do their chores, but an icon recognized by millions. Over the 1990s and into the 21st century, they championed his legacy, ensuring that reissues of his classic gospel albums remained in circulation. Brian, the more musically inclined, curated a series of tribute shows. Some were small gatherings in Nashville or LA, others full-scale events featuring new country stars who'd grown up on Ernie's brand of warm humor and spiritual sincerity. By 1990, even before he passed, Ernie had been inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, recognized for selling over 20 million records and bridging pop, country, and gospel in a way few had done. No sensational tabloids or death hoaxes marred his final years. His real life was story enough. The decades didn't forget him. 16 Tons remains a cultural staple. By 2025, Streaming platforms continue to rack up thousands of plays daily. Younger listeners, intrigued by a classic track that references the brutal monotony of coal mining, discover Ernie's deep, velvety voice for the first time. Many become curious about the rest of his catalog. Western boogie tunes, comedic cuts, and timeless gospel that can lift a heavy heart. Meanwhile, in his hometown of Bristol, a Tennessee Ernie Ford museum was established, full of photographs, personal mementos, and some of the very suits he wore while belting out hymns on national television. Visitors marvel at the small-town boy turned big-time star, ironically bridging the Tennessee-Virginia border in a city that claims to be the birthplace of country music. So if you catch yourself humming 16 tons while going about your day, snapping your fingers to that hypnotic beat, know that you're participating in something far bigger than a chart-topping single from 1955. You're tipping your hat to a man who believed in the power of faith, music, and a good-natured joke. You're stepping momentarily into the shoes of the pea-picker who carried the weight of a nation's hope in one baritone voice and offered it back as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. That voice may have gone silent in 1991, but its echo lingers, each refrain a gentle benediction reminding us that no matter how heavy our burdens, there's always a song that can lighten the load.